Elena Ashworth arrived at Blackthorn House on a Tuesday in October, carrying 2 suitcases and the strange, hollow feeling of inheriting a life she had never been allowed to see. Her mother had died 6 weeks earlier, quietly, in a hospital room 3 counties away, and had left behind exactly one instruction: keep the house, never rent the East Wing, and never, under any circumstances, open the door at the end of the upstairs hallway. Elena had almost laughed when the solicitor read it aloud. It sounded like something from one of the novels her mother kept locked behind glass, spines cracked from rereading, titles she was never once allowed to borrow. But the house itself did not feel like a joke. It stood at the edge of the village where the road gave up and the marsh began, 3 stories of grey stone and ivy, its windows dark even at noon, as though the light simply declined to enter. The first night she told herself it was only the wind. Old houses breathed and groaned, and everyone said so. But the sound that came at 11 o'clock was not a groan. It was footsteps, slow, deliberate, evenly spaced, moving the full length of the upstairs hallway and back again, from the top of the stairs to the locked door and no further. She lay still and counted them. 14 steps one way, 14 steps back. A pause at the door, as though someone stood there listening, and then the whole pattern again, on and on, until she finally slept from exhaustion rather than peace. In the morning she told herself she had dreamed it. But the hallway rug, when she checked it, showed a faint worn path in the old wool, a track pressed down by feet that were not hers, that had never been hers, walked so many times over so many years that the pattern had become permanent. By the 3rd night, Elena stopped pretending. She sat at the top of the stairs in the dark and listened to the footsteps pass within 2 feet of where she sat, close enough that she should have felt the floor shift beneath her, and did not. Whatever walked that hallway did not need the boards to bend for it. It only needed the hallway and the door and the hour. She began asking questions in the village, the quiet way people do when they are trying to make a fear sound like curiosity. The woman at the bakery went still and changed the subject. The old groundskeeper, who had tended Blackthorn's garden for 40 years, looked at her for a long moment and said only that her mother had never once, in all his years there, allowed anyone into the East Wing. Not a cleaner, not a guest, not even Eleanor herself, as a child. He said her mother used to stand at the bottom of the stairs some mornings, very early, looking up at that hallway the way a person looks at a grave. It was the letters that finally gave her the shape of it, tucked behind a false panel in her mother's writing desk, tied with ribbon gone brittle with age, addressed to a name Elena had never once heard spoken in her life. Margaret. There had been a sister, an older sister, born 11 years before Elena's mother, a name erased so completely from the family that not even a single photograph remained in any album Elena had ever leafed through. The letters were not from Margaret. They were written to her, by Elena's mother, across more than 5 decades, 1 or 2 a year, never sent, never answered. Because by the time the first one was written, Margaret had already been gone 6 months. The story came together slowly, the way old grief always does, in fragments that refuse to arrange themselves kindly. Margaret had fallen ill the winter she turned 20, a fever the doctors of that era did not have the tools to name, and the family, afraid of the sickness spreading through the village, and afraid too of what people would say, had moved her into the East Wing and closed the door. They told the neighbours she had gone to the coast to recover. For a while, they told themselves the same thing. Elena's mother had been 9 years old enough to hear her sister coughing through the wall at night, old enough to know eventually that the coughing had stopped, and that no one ever spoke of it again, and that the door had simply stayed closed, as though closing it could close the fact of what had happened behind it. Nobody in that generation of the family ever said the word they meant. They said Margaret had gone away. They said it so many times, over so many years, that the lie hardened into something almost like truth, and the guilt of it, unspoken and unmourned, had nowhere left to go but into the walking. Elena's mother paced that hallway every night of her adult life, from the year she was finally old enough to understand what silence had cost her sister, until the year she left the house for the hospital where she would die, still refusing to say the word grief out loud. 14 steps to the door, 14 steps back. A vigil disguised as a habit disguised as nothing at all, because that was easier than admitting what it truly was. Elena finally opened the door on a night in November, not out of courage exactly, but because she had come to understand that the house was not asking her to be brave. It was asking her to finish something. Inside, the east wing was smaller than she expected, and gentler than she feared. A narrow bed, a window facing the marsh, a hairbrush still resting on the sill, and beside it, a photograph Elena had never seen, a young woman laughing at something just outside the frame, alive in a way the family's careful silence had never once allowed her to remain. Elena sat on the edge of that narrow bed for a long time. Then she said the name aloud, into a room that had not heard it spoken in over 50 years. Margaret. She said it again and again, until it no longer felt like an accusation, only like a fact the house had been waiting patiently to hear. That night, for the first time since Eleanor had arrived at Blackthorn House, the hallway was silent. She told herself, in the weeks that followed, that the haunting was finished, that grief acknowledged simply stops needing to walk. And for a while, she believed it. But some nights, very late, when the marsh fog presses close against the windows, Eleanor finds herself standing at the top of the stairs without quite remembering how she got there, walking the length of the hallway and back, 14 steps one way, 14 steps the other, pausing at a door that no longer needs to stay closed. She tells herself it is only habit. She tells herself the house is simply old, and old houses hold their echoes longer than newer ones. But some nights she wonders whether grief is less like a ghost and more like an inheritance, something passed quietly from one generation to the next, waiting patiently in the walls of a house for someone willing enough or lonely enough to finally carry it. Blackthorn House still stands at the edge of the village, where the road gives up and the marsh begins. And if you were ever to walk its upstairs hallway at 11 o'clock, on a quiet night, you might still hear 2 sets of footsteps instead of 1. 14 steps to the door, 14 steps back. A mother and a daughter, finally walking it together.